almost. The Honourable Government House Leader of the Opposition.
House Leader.
Opposition. House Leader.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will be splitting my time with the member from Wellington, Halton Hills. We are currently facing an unprecedented crisis that strikes at the very heart of Canadian democracy and the rule of law. That is why Conservatives have called for an emergency debate tonight and why we are seized with this matter. Madam Speaker, this is not a debate about remediation agreements. This is a debate about the very essence and the core of our democracy and the integrity of the Prime Minister's office, the integrity of the Privy Councillor, the Clerk of the Privy Council, the integrity of the Finance Minister. Yesterday, Madam Speaker, at Justice Committee, we heard clear, concise, meticulously documented and detailed accounts of unwanted, sustained and coordinated pressure by the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Privy Council, the Finance Minister and their staff on the former Attorney General to give SNC-Lavalin a special deal. Madam Speaker, it was shocking testimony, it was riveting, and it was believable. Let me for a moment, Madam Speaker, recount some of the things that the former Attorney General told us yesterday. This is what she said. She said, "I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion. I spoke to the Minister of Finance on this matter. I told him that engagements from his office to mine on SNC had to stop. They were inappropriate. They did not stop." She went on to say, "Various officials also urged me to take partisan political considerations into account, which is clearly improper for me to do." She told us that Jerry Butts, who then was the chief advisor to the Prime Minister, said to her, "There is no solution here that doesn't involve some interference." Katie Telford said, "We don't want to debate legalities anymore." PCO Clerk Michael Wernick said of the Prime Minister, "I think he's going to find a way to get it done one way or another." And she said this, she said these events constituted pressure to intervene in a matter and that this pressure was not appropriate. Madam Speaker, where did this all begin? Well, from our knowledge, it began about 4 weeks ago, February 7th. A story broke in the Globe and Mail of these alleged allegations that the Prime Minister and his office had exerted pressure on the former Attorney General to give a special deal to SNC-Lavalin. There were questions asked of the Prime Minister immediately. The media asked, "Prime Minister, what's the former Attorney General talking about? Was there pressure applied to her?" And of course, the Prime Minister, in his typical way, said, "There's nothing to see here." In fact, this is what he said. He said, "The allegations in the Globe story this morning are false. Neither the current nor the previous Attorney General was ever directed by me or anyone in my office to take a decision on this matter." He then went on, as we will all recall, to blame the former Attorney General. He said she had a different perspective. He said that if Scott Bryson had not left, then none of this would have happened. His story went on and changed over a number of weeks. In parallel, while the media, we here in the House of Commons were trying to get answers from the Prime Minister, in parallel, we were also, Conservatives and NDP, trying to get the Justice Committee to immediately undertake hearings on this so that answers could be found out immediately. And of course, we were stonewalled. First of all, the Justice Committee we had to force them to meet. Then they didn't want to call witnesses. Then they wanted to change the scope of what was being looked at. After being forced, basically kicking and screaming into having meetings, which, by the way, the Liberals on the Justice Committee were being directed by the House Leader's office and the Prime Minister's office. But after they were basically being forced, kicking and screaming into having these meetings, we then had to pressure them to invite witnesses that needed to be heard from, including the former Attorney General. Yep. So again, on one hand, the Prime Minister is denying that anything happened. There was no pressure applied. She was mistaken. Why didn't she come to me? It was all her fault for not telling me she felt pressure. Simultaneously, we were trying to get answers from the Justice Committee and wanting to see the former Attorney General come and be able to give fulsome testimony. This all culminated in what happened yesterday, where the Attorney General did appear. She was able to give a limited amount of testimony. She was able to speak up until the point when she was fired from her position as Attorney General and became the Veterans Affairs Minister. She was very clear, not yesterday, the day before, that she needed to be able to speak about what happened after she became Veterans Affairs Minister, during the time when she and the Prime Minister spoke in Vancouver, and why she resigned. And yesterday, when asked, she indicated that there was additional information that needed to be provided. So this is where we find ourselves today. The Prime Minister being accused of very serious things. A former Attorney General who, may I remind everyone, is the Attorney General that was, first of all, duly elected to this place, comes with a very impressive and solid career as a prosecutor. She was appointed by the Prime Minister because he had such faith and trust in her. And although we certainly didn't agree with her politics, I think that we would all be able to say that she certainly was one of a cabinet minister that was appointed on merit, and that she certainly is an individual that when she provides testimony and when she speaks, it is incredibly believable. But we have a Prime Minister who even just yesterday said, there are disagreements and perspectives on this, but perspectives, he quite likes that word, but I can reassure Canadians that we're doing our job. And he went on to say, I completely disagree with the former Attorney General's characterization of events. Basically, in other words, she's lying. You know, I have to pause now because it seems to be a pattern for this Prime Minister. When people, and it would seem especially when women say no to him, his attack on them and then his patronizing characterization of what they recollect, there does seem to be a pattern. And I just want to remind everyone of what happened this past summer when the allegations and the story came out that 18 years prior, the Prime Minister was a young man, almost 30-year-old man, had groped a woman in the Kokanee at a festival. And when this story was brought to light in the summertime, just this summer, he was asked about it. And what was the first thing he said? July 1st. Didn't happen. He said, I remember that day. I don't remember any negative interactions at all. Then a few days later, he was pressed further. So then he said, well, you know, often a man experiences interactions differently, maybe inappropriate, but we have to respect that and reflect. Then a few days later, he goes on again, and he starts his social thought process. I think people understand that situations are different, and we reflect and take it seriously. But that we're endeavoring to range just a lot of word salad. What he never says is, I did it, I was wrong, I apologize because it was the wrong thing to do. Right. That seemed to be what his take was on that. And you know, that woman in that scenario wasn't interested in talking. I think she'd had about enough of that Prime Minister. But we now today, although we find ourselves in a somewhat similar situation, we have a woman who is not going to back down, and she will have her story heard, and she will speak truth to power. But we certainly are seeing the same type of approach from the Prime Minister to these very serious, not just allegations, but what we have seen from the testimony to be very credible recollections. He, first of all, says it doesn't happen. He then in a roundabout way degrades her and patronizingly says that was just her perspective. But what he doesn't do is take responsibility. Clearly and openly and transparently take responsibility. And I think if you line up everything we've heard the Prime Minister say to date, and you line that up against what we've heard the former Attorney General say, we have one individual, the former Attorney General, who is clear, who has documented, she has kept records, she's clearly somebody that when you're talking with this woman, you better know that she is not thinking about something else. She is keeping track of what you are saying, and don't think for 1 minute you are going to fool her or get past anything that she's involved with. I think that was very clear yesterday. Then we have a Prime Minister who every time is asked a question is evasive, uses 3 or 4 words that are very legally precise. He is far from transparent. So, Madam Speaker, where does this leave us? This leaves us at a crisis, because if we have a Prime Minister who can't admit that he has done something wrong, take responsibility for it, own up to it, say it was wrong and he's going to change it, which even at this point would be too little too late. But if we don't have a Prime Minister who can be truthful, we can't trust him to get to the bottom of this. I know there's some discussions about an inquiry. Frankly, I don't trust this Prime Minister to call an inquiry. I don't trust this Prime Minister to allow the right witnesses. How much time do I have, Madam Speaker? I'm done. So, Madam Speaker, I will say this is why we are at a crisis at the very heart of our democracy. The Prime Minister doesn't have the moral authority to continue. He needs to resign. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
I thank the member from Portage-Liscar for commencing this debate, and it's indeed an important debate to have, and it's very critical because Canadians are asking questions through their parliamentarians about this very significant issue. It was refreshing to see the former minister speak and to have the privilege waived so that she was enabled to speak yesterday. And what is important is actually to underscore the important testimony that she gave, and some of that testimony was recounted by the member opposite, but not in its entirety. What she said is that the former Attorney General stated that the Prime Minister told her it was her decision to make. Secondly, she said that the PMO staff said that they didn't want to cross any lines. Thirdly, she said that it was appropriate to discuss job impacts. Fourthly, she said that nothing that occurred was unlawful. Fifth, she said that she was never directed. And sixth, and perhaps most importantly, she indicated that the state of our institutions, the independence of our processes is indeed strong. Given that record from what we've heard, what I would ask the member opposite is that is it important to allow the committee to continue their important work, which has called at least 4 witnesses thus far, not excluding all of the academic witnesses, but just today has decided to call also the Principal Secretary, former Principal Secretary, as well as returning the Deputy Minister and the Clerk of the Privy Council.
The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, this is where the problem that we have. Anybody who watched that testimony would never, ever characterize it in the way that that member just characterized it. His characterization just was that she basically said, yeah, there was no problem. The Prime Minister said it was my decision, and the staff said they weren't trying to pressure me, and it was all good. That sure wasn't the testimony I heard. You bet it was her decision. And she said to the Prime Minister and his people a number of times, this is my decision. I have made my decision. And the woman is not for turning. This lady is not for turning, basically, is what she said. Then, sure, did his staff say, oh, no, we don't want to have political pressure. This is pretty, actually, the Liberals are very good at the PMO and the Prime Minister. Say one thing and do another. So I have no doubt that's what he was trying to pull with her, but it wasn't about to work. So, this is the problem. No, her testimony was not refreshing. It was not refreshing. It was disturbing. That's right. It was sad. That's right. It was appalling. We don't need to hear refreshing and wonderful and perspective. We have a government that is being deceptive, that is not owning up to what they have done, and it goes to the very heart of who we are as Canadians and this democracy. So can we right now establish...
Unfortunately, I have to allow for another question. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The issue before us tonight cuts to the very heart of the question of the independence of the judicial system of our country and the sustained interference and undermining by the key members of the Prime Minister's office at the direct direction of the Prime Minister, to me, is a line that has crossed they've gone much beyond that line. But I want to bring my colleagues' attention to some of the most shocking news, which is the threats that were made by the Clerk of the Privy Council, who's supposed to be the independent, nonpartisan voice. I had asked the member, former minister, she felt threatened. She said he had threatened her 3 times, and she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She referenced the Saturday night massacre when Richard Nixon fired the special counsel, and she was then removed from her post. And she said that the clerk phoned her former deputy and said they would put the new minister in, and the first order of business would be getting that SNC deal. So I asked the honourable member, the present Attorney General needs to come clean. What conversations were had with him to force this deferred prosecution agreement? Was that part of the reason that he was put in as the new Attorney General?
The Honourable Leader, the Honourable House Leader of the Official Opposition has 1 minute to respond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do very much appreciate my colleague's question and the work that he's done on this. I think that there are so many questions that still have to be answered. Certainly the former Attorney General wants to talk about why she resigned. She wants to talk about discussions that she had with the Prime Minister subsequent to her being Veterans Affairs Minister, which I think what my colleague is talking about, the threats, are very important. I think we also have to talk about why did the Clerk of the Privy Council reference board meetings that SNC Lavalin was going to be having, and that was connected to why they needed to get the deal. We do need to hear how in the world the current Attorney General can have any credibility, which I don't believe he has. I believe he needs to resign because he has already stated he believes whatever the Prime Minister says, and he has already, from the testimony we heard yesterday, been instructed on what he needs to do on this deal. So there are a lot of questions that have to be answered. Thank you.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.